My name is Supriya Jha, and on behalf of Nasdaq, UN Women, and New York City Fintech Women, I welcome you to this conference. We have a fully packed agenda for the next few hours with speakers who will surely enrich your perspectives. So I'm quite excited about the program today. I'll share a few tips to help you enhance your viewing experience. To view the agenda of the program, please click on the link at the bottom of the screen in the resource section. The bios of the speaker are to the right side of the screen, and you can scroll down to see anyone's information at any given point in time. Feel free to ask questions. There is a Q&A section at the bottom of the screen as well. And finally, and most importantly, in case you want to expand the view and watch the speakers in full view, you can expand your screen as well. In case you have any troubles with the connection, please consider refreshing your browser. And we will also recommend, in case you have the option, please use Google Chrome as your main browser. And with that, I hope you have a great experience today and find it very enriching and fulfilling. Happy International Women's Day to everyone. I'm very honored to welcome Nasdaq's executive host and our Chief Financial Officer, Ann Dennison, for further remarks. Ann, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Supriya, and happy International Women's Day to everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. As Supriya said, my name is Ann Dennison. I currently serve as Nasdaq's Chief Financial Officer, 6 days in, and the executive sponsor of the Women in Nasdaq Employee Network. So on behalf of all of my colleagues at Nasdaq, I'd like to extend everyone a warm welcome to the conference. I'm excited to be here with you all today. I'm joining you from the New York City area. And although we may be meeting in a virtual setting, the upside is that it has enabled us to convene so many fantastic leaders and industry peers from all over the world today. We have a terrific lineup of speakers representing a wide range of industries and sectors. And with the unexpected and unprecedented risks born out of the pandemic, it's important to assess how this has impacted women worldwide and how we can better work towards equality wherever we find it lacking. We are co-creators of our environment, and it's on us to make sure that progress happens at the workplace and in society. For me personally, serving as the CFO at Nasdaq during such a unique time is a tremendous opportunity, and I'm excited to hear from our speakers today. Today, like Supriya said, today's agenda is jam-packed with some timely discussion topics ranging from the government's role in the advancement of women, the pandemic's impact on business, and how fintech companies are helping women, an ever-increasingly popular topic in the executive suite. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope you enjoyed today's program. For opening remarks, I'd now like to welcome Anita Bhatia, the Deputy Executive Director for Resource Management, Sustainability, and Partnerships at UN Women. Thanks, Anita.
Thank you very much, Ann. And I'm just doing a sound check before I say anything further. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Anita. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. First of all, let me just start by wishing everybody here happy International Women's Day. Let's hope that this is going to be not just a great day for all of us, but also a great year. We have a lot of work ahead of us, ladies and gentlemen, because we have seen in the last year an extraordinary, damaging, devastating, and crippling effect on women's leadership, which is the theme of this year's International Women's Day. I really want to thank Nasdaq and New York City Fintech Women for co-organizing this event with us. And to Nasdaq in particular, I would like to give a shout out for being one of our Women's Empowerment Principles signatories, and to say that we rang the bell last week for gender equality. And I'm really happy that we had over 100 stock exchanges that are going to follow in the next 2 weeks. And I also want to take this opportunity to thank our partner, the European Union, for their continued support of the Women's Empowerment Principles. I said at the outset that last year had been a devastating year. And I say that because we saw that there were huge, multiple, intersecting impacts on women, particularly in three areas: income, health, and security. In income, because a lot of the jobs that were lost in the pandemic, particularly at the outset, were in sectors that are heavily feminized: retail, tourism, travel, domestic work. Then we saw impacts on health because the public health system had to pivot to solving for the pandemic. Attention to women's health issues suffered. And of course, we all saw the exponential rise in violence against women. Women should have been safe at home, and the home became the place where women were the least safe. So, given this extraordinary year, what is it that we can look forward to, and how are we going to address some of the things that we are only now beginning to realize as a result of the pandemic? And some of these things have to do with, first, the huge burden of care that women are carrying as a result of the pandemic. Even before the pandemic broke out, women did 3 times as much unpaid care work as men, and that number has only gone up. Second, what we are seeing is that in many parts of the world, women, because of that care burden and because of the fact that they have school children at home, are not going back to work. So there is a real danger of a major decline in female labor force participation, not just in advanced countries, but particularly in poorer countries around the world. And this will have long-term consequences for GDP and for productivity. The pie will shrink for all when it shrinks for women. And then finally, we still have ongoing cases of violence against women. This has not come down, and nobody can be economically productive if they are being abused. So, we have very many important problems that we still have to solve, and new problems that are arising that have only become visible as a result of the pandemic. So one opportunity we do have is to say, as we seek to build back better, what can each of us do? The problems are too large for this to be solved just by the UN, or just by New York City Fintech, or just by Nasdaq, or just by academics. This requires a partnership approach where the public sector, the private sector, and international organizations all have a role to play. Governments have a very important role in ensuring that fiscal and monetary stimulus packages really put women at the center of their recovery efforts, that there are stimulus checks for women who are very often the heads of single-family households, that there are businesses that are run by women who are receiving targeted attention, and that there are cash transfers being made. Businesses have an opportunity by ensuring that they are worrying about childcare, that they are providing flexible working hours, that they are ensuring zero tolerance for violence, and that they are contributing to building back better. We also know that international organizations such as ours can play a very important role, as we do, by highlighting the issues that we are seeing and offering policy solutions for those. So working in partnership between the public sector, the private sector, and international organizations, we can actually make a difference. And it's really important that as we do this, we think about this issue of women and women's leadership. And unfortunately, I have to share a message that women's leadership is still not where it should be. And that is because we have seen that although there have been huge improvements over the last few decades, women still make up only 25% of parliamentarians worldwide. Less than 10% of heads of state today in 2021 are women. Less than 15 countries in the world, 15 out of almost 200, have gender equal cabinets. And in a statistic that just came out last week, of all of the task forces that have been set up around the world to look at the issue of COVID-19 and recovery from pandemic, less than 5% of them had gender parity in the task forces. Ladies and gentlemen, on International Women's Day, I'm sorry to say we still live in a male-dominated world. And this is why we want today to take those actions that are going to help to change this and to really move the needle. So because our priorities include financial inclusion and equality, particularly for women businesses to start, to run, and to grow their businesses, that is why on the occasion of International Women's Day, UN Women is very happy to join the Better Than Cash Alliance, which will, in fact, help to advance women's financial inclusion and equality across the world. Through fintech, we can continue to harness the potential to empower women and girls, to put resources in their hands, which will give them both the economic clout as well as the confidence to be able to build back better. I'm really pleased to see so many women in the fintech sector at this event, and I'm pleased to see their commitment to gender equality. However, we need more women to start and work fintech in fintech companies, and we want more women to use fintech. Because it is a highly skilled sector, the barriers for entry are high, and women are very often not on an equal footing with men because they often don't have the digital literacy that is needed and the financial access and skills to really leverage this sector for their own advantage. And we've also seen that this is the era when cyber violence is actually going up. So let us all join in a call for action that stresses that the fintech industry, in fact, has the potential to lift hundreds and thousands of women and men and their families out of extreme poverty and contribute to inclusive, just, and equitable societies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Bhatia. I think we now welcome our next speaker, Ms. Hilde.
Yes, good afternoon, good morning, good evening. This is Hilde Hardeman speaking from Brussels in the European Union. Thank you all so much for joining us in celebrating International Women's Day. Gender equality is part of the European Union's DNA ever since it was created more than 6 decades ago. The Union aims to promote peace and to ensure the well-being of all women and men. Challenges remain really formidable. Anita has set the scene. The pandemic has meant a setback for many women. In many cases, women have been the first to be affected, the first to lose their jobs, the first to lose access to finance. So empowering women is absolutely essential to build forward back better. The European Commission, with women leadership, with President Ursula von der Leyen at the helm, walks the talk. Gender equality is at the core of EU policy making. It is at the center of the Union's game-changing recovery plan, Next Generation EU, and it is at the heart of the Union's investment programme, InvestEU. InvestEU stimulates funding with a gender lens, catalyzing investment in female-led enterprises, harnessing the power of women as investors, offering opportunities for mentoring and networking. The EU online platform WeGate supports women in starting, financing and managing a business. Networks of female business angels help women entrepreneurs reach a critical mass of investors, improve risk sharing and expand business opportunities. And prizes for women innovators and women executives put women's power and creativity in the limelight. The Bank of the European Union Investment Bank, puts its financial weight behind gender-focused projects in Europe and beyond. And with UN Women, we work across the globe to turn the We Empower principles into reality. So today, together with Nasdaq, UN Women and NYC Women in Fintech, we want to show women around the world how the sky is the limit. So let's ring the bell for gender equality. Women really work wonders. Thank you all. And let me now hand over to Adina Fischer. Thank you.
Thank you, Hilda. Hi, I'm Adina Fischer, and I'm co-chair of the Sponsorship Committee and a member of the Executive Board of New York City Fintech Women. Many of you may be familiar with our organization, but those who are new to NYC Fintech Women, welcome. NYC Fintech Women was started over 3.5 years ago by Michelle Tran and Sasha Pilch. Our mission is to connect, promote, and empower women in finance, technology, and fintech. We are now a community of over 5,000 members, not only in New York City, but internationally. Today, we are honored to host International Women's Day with Nasdaq and UN Women. All three organizations have united to champion women's equality and celebrate women's achievements. This year's International Women's Day theme is to challenge. I hope today that I can challenge everyone to continue to take action for equality and raise awareness against bias. And with that, I'm honored to introduce Erin Corbett, WIN President of Nasdaq. Thank you, Erin.
Thank you, Adina. My name is Erin Corbett, and I work in information security at Nasdaq. I am also the 2021 President of Women at Nasdaq. Women at Nasdaq envisions a world where empowered and competent women are represented at every level of an organization and are key to driving success. Today's event, focusing on women in leadership and achieving an equal future in a COVID-19 world, supports this vision. I want to thank our speakers for joining us, and I look forward to hearing their thoughts and visions of a future in which women achieve equal representation in all industries. I also want to thank our audience for joining us, and I hope you enjoy our programming today. I would now like to welcome my co-lead and 2021 Vice President of Women in Nasdaq, Laura De Lorenzo.
Thanks, Erin. Happy International Women's Day to all. As Erin mentioned, my name is Laura De Lorenzo, and I work in Nasdaq's finance organization. This year, I have the great pleasure to serve as Women in Nasdaq's Vice President alongside Erin. Women in Nasdaq has some exciting content and events in the works for 2021. And it starts today. With this accomplished panel of speakers, we are so fortunate to have join us. I'd like to now welcome Pam Gibbs. Pam is the Director in the Office of Minority and Women Inclusion at the Securities and Exchange Commission. Pam will kick off what is sure to be a great discussion on the role of government in the advancement of women. Is Pam, are you on?
Good morning. Good morning, and thank you for that introduction. My name again is Pam Gibbs, and I'm the Director for the Office of Minority and Women Inclusion at the SEC. And I'm joined today, I'm delighted today to be. I'm getting a little feedback. Are you guys getting feedback? Sorry. I'm delighted today to be joined by Acting Chair Allison Lee. Today is a special day. This day grew out of the suffrage movement in the early 1900s to promote women's rights. 100 years later, we are recognizing that issues of equity and equality still remain for women, particularly in developing countries. So Chair Lee and I are delighted and honored to share a few thoughts today on our personal journeys to public service and provide insights on the role of government in the advancement of women. With that, I'd like to begin by giving our standard disclaimer for both Allison Lee and myself, and that is that the views that we express today are our own and do not necessarily reflect those of the commission or its staff. Chair Lee, both of us have different paths to the government. Would you share with the office about your background and your journey to the SEC?
Thank you, Pam. See you. And thank you. I want to thank Nasdaq for having us both here today. I'm looking forward to the conversation. I'd be happy to share a little bit about my path to the SEC, which was a long and winding one. I grew up in the Deep South in the 1960s and 70s, and in a family where I had, my parents didn't go to college. I didn't know anyone in my family. No one in my family went to college. I didn't even know people who went to college. So I kind of started out trying to find my own way. And that has proved to help me be very resilient over the years. I got married young, worked my way through college and undergraduate, and then worked my way through law school in the same way. By the 1990s is when I graduated from law school. I then began to interview with firms. I was living in Denver, Colorado at the time, and I remember very well that interview circuit and being I actually once getting lectured by a partner that I was interviewing me about the mommy track and how little patience they had for that. And that really got me thinking and researching firms and their track records for gender equity at entry levels and at the partner level. And I wound up at a firm that I thought had the best track record eventually for how it helped women grow in their career paths. And so I immediately became interested in securities law because that was where I thought some of the most challenging and interesting cases where I was a litigator and began a practice in securities law, eventually making my way to the SEC. Never looked back. It's been the best decision I've made in my entire life. I have loved my work at the SEC, and in large part, it's because it has purpose. And that was something that was missing for me in the law firm environment, which was great, and I learned a lot there, but I didn't feel like it really had the kind of purpose that I was looking for, which I found in public service and at the SEC. So it's been, by the time I graduated from law school, I was 40 years old. By the time I came to the SEC, I was in my mid to late 40s. And as I said, I've never looked back. I've been just so fortunate to be here. But that's enough about me, Pam. I'd really like to hear about your path to the SEC. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. My path is a little different. I grew up probably similar to you. I am first generation, and so I was unexposed to people that had gone to law school or professional school. But what I did know is that I grew up in segregated Virginia at the time, and it surely when I started school, integration had started to take place, and Virginia was slow to integrate its schools. And so because of that, I've always had a passion for equality and equal rights, because I knew then as a young child the difference of, we see a lot on TV about colored and non-colored. And that was an experience that I grew up with. And so I can remember in fourth grade, I said that I wanted to be a lawyer. Of course, my parents supported that. They didn't know how to tell me to go about being a lawyer, but they supported that desire of mine to be a lawyer. So I've always had an interest in equality, civil rights. And so when I started college, I focused on that. I was an advocate for equality at University of Virginia. I kept that at Georgetown University Law School. And when I finished law school, I started at the Department of Labor. So I've spent my entire career in public service, and it has been very rewarding to me. And so along this track of equality and being a civil rights lawyer, you know, I learned probably 15 years in that it wasn't going to get me to the top, at a seat at the table to really advocate for change for women and minorities like I thought was important. I had seen so many cases and been on the side where I had to advocate for unfairness and inequities on behalf of the agency that I represented. And it just got to be not satisfying anymore to me. And so I became a manager and I became a leader in the EEO office. And that led me to leave the Department of Labor, where I spent most of my career, early days, to the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. And that was my first exposure to the industry. I can remember preparing for that interview, wondering what a commodity was. Not really sure what a commodity was, but it didn't take long to understand the agency and understand really that I had discovered something that I also was not aware of, and that's the importance of financial literacy and financial education. And so from CFTC, you know, of course, most people migrate to the SEC, and that's how I got to the SEC. But I have spent my entire career in the government in the space of diversity and inclusion and equality and equity.
Wow, I love that sense of adventure coming to the CFTC and not knowing what a commodity is. That's courage and that's adventuresome. So and we've been very lucky that we got you at the SEC. Let me just ask this: as the director of the Office on Minority Women Inclusion at the SEC, you have been instrumental in advancing diversity and inclusion here, and especially in this last year, you've been a one-woman whirlwind at the SEC. It's been just astonishing to watch. Can you discuss a little bit about OMWI's efforts in this area and how the SEC's culture has changed since OMWI was established?
Sure. So I was listening to a prior speaker opening remarks, and she talked about the impact that COVID-19 has had on women. You know, we were the first to be, to leave our jobs, the first to be impacted. And that's really how my office was created. My office was created as a result of the financial crisis of 2008. If you guys can recall, there was a lot of impact on women. And so as a result, Congress established in Dodd-Frank, it created these offices of minority and women inclusion. And I joined the SEC to start our office. And so as I look back on my time at the SEC, I can't believe, one, that I've been at the SEC for 9 years. But two, I am so proud, not just because of my efforts, but because collectively of the efforts of all of my colleagues across the agency to advance women and minorities in our workplace. We've gone from an agency that initially had probably 30% women in our workforce to now we are at 46%, which is, I think, excellent, with many of those women serving in leadership positions and all throughout the agency in mission critical functions of the agency. I'm very pleased that part of my job was also to look at business operations and how we utilize minority and women-owned companies. And so one of the things that I'm very pleased is that when I started, we were only contracting out about 21% to minority and women-owned businesses. Now we are at 34%, and that's been sustained over the last 3-4 years. I'm very proud of the fact that now we're starting to engage our regulated entities around leading practices, because I think as a result, it impacts many of the women that are on this webinar today listening to, because we are the leaders in many ways regarding diversity and inclusion at the SEC. At least that's the role that I think government ought to play, is being a leader. And I like to think that, the impact of these offices in Dodd-Frank have really impacted the industry in a positive way as a result of diversity and inclusion. But then when I look at inclusion, diversity is really the makeup, the composition of your workforce. But when I look at inclusion, and I think that we have a low attrition rate, very few women and minorities leave the SEC. So, and that's primarily because we've worked very hard at the SEC to create a culture that is very inclusive and engaging and supportive of the leadership needs and the needs of women in terms of workplace flexibilities, a sense of empowerment, a voice at the table. But I think one of the key things that has been instrumental is having leadership support and having the support of someone like you, Chair Lee, who has advocated from day one your support for diversity and inclusion. So I know that you've been a champion of diversity and inclusion, both as commissioner and in your current role as acting chair. Can you describe why diversity and inclusion is important to you?
I will. You switched topics on me, though. I still had another personal question, but I'll get back to that in a minute. You're not getting off the hook that easily. It was lovely hearing about your journey and your accomplishments. So why is it important to me? Probably for the same reason that it is to thousands of women. It's two things. First, it's personal. I have spent a lifetime facing challenges of my own arising from gender bias and discrimination. It gives me a perspective and experience, and a background in really just understanding the issue internally. And then second, it's just the fundamental fairness of diversity and inclusion. It's inherently appealing and unassailable. So I kind of come at it from those two broad perspectives. But more specifically, now, of course, there's a wealth of data to back up that which we know instinctively to be true, right? That businesses do better, government does better, everyone does better when we have a broad, diverse employee base and customer base, all of it. I mean, it's been shown to drive, diversity has been shown to drive innovation, increase productivity. It's particularly important at the leadership level. It's been linked in corporations to profitability. Companies with a diverse workforce and environment can attract greater talent, which drives out performance of peers. Like I was saying earlier, when I went to that one law firm and I get lectured by the one person about the mommy track, I do my research, I go to the firm that did better, as did countless other talented, diverse candidates. And so again, it's the statistical benefits are there. It's obvious and important, and yet we're not where we need to be yet. I mean, we still have work to do. Women make up more than 50% of the financial services industry workforce, but account for less than 22% of the leadership roles. So there's work to be done, and for that reason, I'm very passionate about advancing that work because I know it's fair, I know it's right, and I know it's what's best for our economy and our nation. In addition to that, so it's a natural place for someone in my role to focus, and very fortunate that as I do so, I have people like you on the workforce who are just, as I said earlier, I can't overstate a one-woman whirlwind at the SEC.
So I want to go back. What is your personal question to me?
Yes. So this is one of my favorite. This is one of my favorite ones, and it's one I've actually even just wanted to ask you and when we've had one-on-one meetings, and that is, can you tell us about women along the way who've helped guide you or who were influential in your professional development? I'd love to hear these answers because it helps us all think about how to be those women.
Okay, sure. So as I said, I am first generation, but one of the things I've always felt like, and we hear this a lot, a village. I've always felt like I had a village of support. So if I was to say, what women along the way have been supportive of my career, I can think of a couple. One, my mother. I think just to have the tenacity to raise 5 kids and all of us be able to go to college, and my mother and father, but particularly my mother, because my mother had dreams of being a professional too. Back then, she wanted to be a secretary, which was like a big thing. She wanted to be a secretary, but she started to got married and started to have a family. And she tells my sisters all the time, I had 5 children by the time I was 24, so I don't want to hear any complaints. And so I think about my mother in her tenacity and in her will to want all of her kids, particularly her daughters, to be educated, to be independent, and to be in positions where we could some way influence. And I would say that out of the 5 of us, most of us got to that capacity. We're all still very close. We're all still close in age. And my mother still, she says, I don't know, Pam, but I know you'll figure it out in terms of her support. So I have to give first a tip off the hat to my mother. And then secondly, I learned very early on, and this was probably in college, I joined a sorority that I'm still active in. We hear a lot about it now, Alpha Kappa Alpha. Those group of women taught me about service too. It's not just about me and my desire to be a professional, but it's always about giving back. And that's probably what drove me to the public sector. And then the other aspect of that is I tell women all the time now to create a board of directors. I've always been fortunate to have a board of directors, women that I could go to with challenges, problems, issues that I confronted both in my personal life and at work. And each of them brings different set of skills. Most of them are either my age, some are younger, most are older that have been, either high-ranking officials in their career, and I've been able to go to them. And that became particularly important as I became director of the Office of Minority and Women Inclusion at the SEC. It was not an easy role to come into at the SEC. The SEC was not always open to the concept of establishing an Office of Minority and Women Inclusion, a diversity office. So having this set of women that really were mentors and sponsors and guidance to me has always been instrumental. And I still go to my board of directors when I encounter challenges at the SEC. And then finally, I would say that I am a big reader of memoirs and biographies. I think you have to read about sometimes we think our challenges are unique to us, but it's when we read and understand that our challenges are not unique to us. Oftentimes women, particularly women of color, and those are the books that I particularly like because I understand that their challenges may be more like my challenges that I face in an environment that is majority, where there are very few women of color that are leaders in the organization. I rely on books on leadership styles, how to overcome, how not to associate everything with racism. So I would say, it's been a whole host of women in my life that have really been influential to me. I wish I could just name a few, but it's hard to just point out one or two because in many ways they all have added value to my life, including my mom, who I think, when I think about who I admire the most, I think about my mother and the challenges that women currently have with raising kids versus the challenges that my mother had raising 5 kids in rural Virginia and not really having access to resources, that we have so many resources now. So that's hopefully that's responsive to your question.
It is. I love the idea of the board of directors, and I do a similar thing without having labeled it that way. I do a very similar thing, and I think it makes a lot of sense. You find those women in your life who can give you good advice, who understand, who've been through some of the same challenges, and you seek their advice and their counsel and their solace and all manner of help throughout your career. So that's very inspiring, Pam. Very inspiring.
So coming back to you now, what have you seen as impediments to increasing the number of women in the financial services industry? And what are some of the steps that the private sector can take to help advance women in business?
Sure, I think to a certain extent, we're just battling decades-old beliefs and implicit bias that, for one thing, that women elect not to aspire to the highest ranks in firms and that they remove themselves from the running for top positions, or that home care and family obligations remove women from the workforce. I mean, women obviously often bear primary childcare and other caretaking responsibilities, but that's not the cause of gender disparity, right? I mean, the principal cause is just the dearth of opportunity for women at senior levels. And so, I think many companies are becoming more aware of the importance of increased representation of diverse talent, but they seem to struggle with how to make material changes. And what and how should diversity and inclusion efforts be undertaken to kind of drive financial performance? Creating an effective culture of diversity requires difficult and inclusive conversations about cultural, societal, unconscious bias. You need universal buy-in from the entry level all the way to the C-suite in the board of directors. You need intersectional programming that's designed to be self-reflective and value-changing to create a culture that can overcome this kind of implicit bias, and that's hard work. From a regulatory perspective, kind of what steps can we take? The SEC, of course, has disclosure tools that provide investors with necessary information to make informed investment decisions. But the financial services industry should be proactive in their diversity and inclusion disclosures, rather than waiting for us to sort of lay out rules and tell them what they have to do. They can compete based on this information. They should get that information out there instead of waiting for us to tell them what they have to share. They should take actionable, measurable, transparent steps that signal that attracting and retaining and advancing women are priorities. So that includes creating a diversity and inclusion strategic plan. It includes taking steps to get your board composition in order. It includes self-assessment reports like the one that we have created for the financial services industry. And I'll just put in another plug to, folks should fill that out. We didn't get as good of a, response to that as I had hoped, or as you had hoped too, I know. And so I'd love to see more people take that self-assessment. They need to make plans for gender pay equality. They need to make efforts that are specifically designed to or aligned to growing the share of women in leadership roles. So there's plenty they should do. It's funny, when you think about financial firms, they're experts in the products and the services that they provide. But when it comes to diversity and inclusion, they're not. What do they do when they need experts in other areas? They hire them. That's what they should be doing. They should be hiring experts in this field to help them get to where they need to be. It just makes sense when you think about it that, anytime you can see a goal that you need to achieve, you're not there yet. You look around, you say, do I have the talent here? Do I have the knowledge base? Do I have the expertise and the experience to get it done? If the answer is no, get out there and hire people who do know how, like you, who do know how to get it done. My view is bring in the experts, get the work done. Use that good work to help to increase your competitive edge among your peers, and everyone will be better for it. Let me switch and ask you a question now, Pam. I've had you on the hot seat, and it's fun while I have you here. So I'm gonna take full advantage of it. And you mentioned this a little bit earlier, but there's a lot of research that shows that COVID-19, that the pandemic has had a very disproportionate impact in economic terms on women. And so I'm glad to see this as a topic that they're going to address in a later panel this morning. I think it's largely due to traditional problems that women face in the labor market being amplified by this. So in your opinion, what is the role of government in trying to prevent these disproportionate impacts?
Wow, that's a heavy question. my first response is that, you know, the government, particularly the federal government, we're leaders, and it is the government has always been that safety net for citizens, and we should always remain that safety net, being leaders in terms of what type of support, particularly when we see one group being disadvantaged, impacted. COVID is unique and very different, but I've been pleased to see, one, the efforts that the government is making, the federal government is making in terms of augmenting people's salaries, augmenting the type of resources that are being provided to small businesses. Those are all been good. I've actually been more impressed by the work that the SEC, the leadership that the SEC did. You know, over a year ago, actually a year tomorrow, we were sent home because of the pandemic. Many of us were terrified. And one of the things that I admire about working at the SEC and have been impressed by is the leadership of the commission. The commission immediately recognized that women now with kids at home that couldn't go to school, so our agency took the lead to provide employees additional 20 hours of administrative leave to help care for COVID-related matters, whether it was taking care of child care issues, taking care of elderly people, taking care of yourself. And that's on top of the other flexibilities that we are offered. I thought that that was a great leadership move. I think without those additional hours, that ability to set aside time during the middle of the day to tend to your families, I'm not sure that we would have had as many women stay in the workplace. That was very troubling to me. I was in a meeting once and someone indicated that, you know, many of the women want to give up. They want to, you know, they're just overwhelmed with having to deal with childcare issues, homeschooling, along with the busy demands of their job at the SEC. And so to have this leave that was given to people was a big benefit, but also having women to provide a platform for women to talk about these issues. And so at the SEC, you know, we have affinity groups we support 8 different affinity groups, and the Women's Committee, which is our largest affinity group at the SEC, you know, they took great steps to provide mechanisms, talks, brown bag luncheons to support other women that may not have all the flexibility. So to answer your question, what role did the government play? I think we're leaders. And we're leaders in the sense that what kind of support can we provide the nation? 2, what kind of support can we provide women in particular? And then it's agencies like the SEC that says that we're going to go a step farther. We're going to address the particular needs of our employees by providing them with particular benefits that may be helpful to support them during this COVID time. I think about access to capital. That's a big thing at the SEC, and how many women entrepreneurs had to contemplate whether they were going to close their business. And I think about our office, the Advocate for Small Business on Capital Formation, led by Martha Miller. She's done an outstanding job for the last year, providing information, resources, talks, dialogues to help encourage women, particularly women of color, about how to continue to access capital. So hopefully that's responsive. But I think at the end, I think that's why I like government, is because I think that we owe an obligation to every public citizen, and we owe that obligation in the sense that, you know, are there particular people that are in need more than others? And if more people, and if there is, then it's the role of the government to step in to bring the weakest of our citizens up. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah, setting a standard, right? Setting a standard for others to follow. I agree with that, and I think it's critically important. One last question too, where do you think we're headed in terms of equality and greater diversity and inclusion, just broadly?
I think we're headed in a positive direction. You know, diversity, when you do this work of diversity and inclusion, it is a long game. It is not a short game. You're not going to get there in a short term. And that's because of people's values and their beliefs. Inclusion in equity started out as social justice terms. And as you mentioned, we are finally understanding the business benefits to diversity and inclusion and equity in the workplace. So I think we're getting there. I think 2020, with the pandemic, with the race issues, with the unemployment issues, with the deaths, really was a pivotal moment in diversity and inclusion. So I feel more inspired doing this work than I probably have in my entire career, because I look at the SEC, for example, and how we pivoted last year, not only to go home and work at home full time and not see our colleagues in person, but to also be willing to engage around race discussions when the George Floyd killing took place. And that was the first time the agency had found, and I said finally, we had never been willing to address the issue of race in our workplace. And that was a pivotal moment at the SEC. So I believe we're headed in the right direction in terms of more equality, more willingness to look at the pay parity differences, where there are inequities still, companies willing to step up and to acknowledge the importance of diversity and inclusion. So if I was to look back on my 30 years in the federal government, I think of all times we are at the best spot that we could ever possibly be. That doesn't mean that the road is finished, though. There's still much more work to be done, and I do a shout out to women of color. I recognize that we still face many challenges in the workplace, and some of those issues that are unique to us as women of color, I'm hoping that we can explore, particularly at the SEC, and that the general financial services industry begins to explore those unique issues and challenges that impact us as women of color.
Yep, agreed. Having those tough conversations like you've helped us have over the last year, I think has really moved the needle, and it's been a critical piece of our improvement.
And I think it makes us overall more productive. I think we're closer. I really feel like the empathy and that we shared last year as a agency brought us all very closer together. So I think the productivity has been higher because many people were able to release some thoughts about how they were treated in our work environment that maybe many of us were unaware. So Chair Lee, as we begin to wrap up, I always think it's important to share words of encouragement to women embarking on professional careers in the financial services industry. What advice would you give young women today embarking on careers?
I see so many amazing young women. I frequently ask them for advice, but I will tell you that the one thing that has helped me the most in every struggle and every challenge that I faced, not just professional, is to try to be authentic to your own true voice. Figure out what that is and stick with it. Don't let people tell you you need to be this way, you need to be that way. If you want to be heard, you have to do X, or if you want to move up, you have to do Y. If the way you are fits with stereotypes, fine. If it doesn't, fine. Just figure out who you are and be authentic to that. I will add, and this you brought this up a little bit earlier, be adventurous. Be willing to take chances, be willing to take risks, and understand that if you do, sometimes you're going to fall down, and don't be harsh on yourself when you do. That's how you learn. Those are cliches, but over time, you learn just how true those cliches are. Look for ways to support other women and build networks together, like the board of directors that you mentioned. Friendship and professional support go hand in hand, and they go a long way toward helping us all kind of bring one another up and finding role models. Reading books, people like Michelle Obama, who just blow me away, and look for those folks. And what I do many times in the women in my life that I have received support from, that I've looked up to, I ask myself, what would they do? You get into a tough situation, I say to myself, what would Michelle Obama do in this circumstance, or what would my grandmother do in this circumstance? So, again, I think supporting one another, looking for ways to do that, being brave, not being afraid to fail, and being authentic is the best advice I can provide.
Well, that's great advice. I love all of your suggestions. I think that they are so wonderful. And so thank you so much, Chair Lee, for joining me today in this dialogue around diversity and inclusion and the role of government in advancing women issues. And particularly, I want to thank the audience, particularly those that are joining us today. Have a wonderful day celebrating International Women's Day. It is an important day, and we honor it. Continue to push for equity and equality and pushing for rights that you believe are important in the workplace. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Michelle Train, co-founder of the New York City Fintech Women, who will lead the next panel on how fintech is helping women access to finance. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Pam, and thank you, Allison. Such inspiring words from both of you. I 100% agree with your advice on building a board of directors. It is one thing that we advocate for at NYC Fintech Women, is that you always need people in your corner. And that's your board of directors, professionally and personally. Fantastic. Let's see. Sorry, are you guys hearing a little bit of feedback on my end? Okay, 1 second. Let me see what I can do about that. Great. I think that should have fixed it. A little restart always fixes the problem with technology. Fantastic. Well, I am super excited to be here today. My name is Michelle Tran. I am the co-founder of NYC Fintech Women. Fintech is the intersection of finance and technology, and it is allowing women access to finance in so many ways. Most importantly, these innovations are really allowing more and more women to scale and reach new markets and new wealth levels. Our four panelists today build and manage networks that give women greater access to finance in so many diverse ways, from micro-lending and banking via cell phones to having over so many banks in the European Banking Union sign the UN Women's Empowerment Principles. Today, we'll discuss the way technology is opening access to women in finance and the importance of supporting and increasing women in decision-making roles at these fintechs. What I'd like to do first is have everyone introduce themselves very quickly, just with your name and your role in your firm. Vim, why don't we start with you?
Of course, and good afternoon for me and good morning for all of you. Happy Women's Day. It's a particular honor to be here. I am Wim Meijs. I am the CEO of the European Banking Federation, who represents 3,500 banks across 32 countries in Europe. Last year we signed the Women Empowerment Principles, and we are busy rolling them out. So it's great to be here.
Fantastic. Thank you for being here. Shivani?
Hi, everyone. Thank you again for inviting me to be a part of this. I'm Shivani. I'm the CEO and founder of Tala, and we're a fintech company that is focused on financial inclusion in emerging markets. And so definitely have a lot to share about how we make sure to include women as part of that.
Great. MM?
Good morning, everyone. It's good afternoon to those of you in Europe, like myself. So my name is Ritu Sangha. I am the founder and CEO of Bankability. It's a fintech startup that is focused on to solve the problem of access to credit, specifically in sub-Saharan Africa.
Fantastic. Thanks for being here, Brooke.
Hi, my name is Brooke Berman, and I run partnerships for Propel, which is a fintech based in Brooklyn.
Thank you. As you can all see, we are a global panel. We have Vim and MM sitting in Europe, and the rest of us sitting in the US. And so as we are starting our morning, some are just heading into the afternoon. And that really speaks to our panel as well. And so fintech, really is a global technology platform. What I'd love to start off with today is really understanding how fintechs have changed access for women. Starting with Shivani, can you tell us a bit about your story of how you started Tala? I had read that Tala really started from a personal experience while you were in India and doing some micro lending personally, and you saw that there was a lot of benefit that you could provide in terms of connecting those lenders with those that needed financing.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing I should mention is I never thought I was going to be an entrepreneur or let alone, found a fintech company. And so I really did, to your point, find a problem that I couldn't stop thinking about, and in some ways started working on the solution, and then it ended up becoming a company of its own. But the journey to Tala, I used to, in between kind of my private sector experience, I also worked at the UN Population Fund, and I had the opportunity to interview a little over 3,500 individuals across 9 different countries. And during that time, I got to really understand how individuals were spending their money, how they were thinking about growing their money and protecting their money. And what I realized was that there was an enormous amount of capacity and potential that was really locked up because, individuals, about 2 billion individuals around the world are really underserved by financial institutions. And they were not able to get access to the working capital they needed to grow their businesses or improve their quality of life or even withstand emergencies. And so to your point, I started kind of unconsciously or just doing it on my own because I saw that potential and quickly realized that this was not going to be scalable for me to just keep using my savings on it. And so I kept asking myself, what was helping me make those decisions? And what I realized was really seeing the daily life data in front of me. It was, seeing how customers ran their businesses, bills that they paid on time, money that they put under their mattress or into a lockbox. And so from there, I started to think about, what would be a scalable source of this information, and realized, there are about 1.8 billion Android devices around in emerging markets alone. And so could this be a method that we could actually use to gather daily life data and actually build something that puts more control, in my opinion, in our customers' hands, which again is something that we really need to think about as we build trust with women to bring them into the formal financial sector. And so that's really kind of where my journey started. And then fast forward, learned how to code and ended up actually, again, testing this idea of, could a customer come in through the Play Store using an Android application? Could we provide unsecured credit and build a proprietary credit score using the mobile data and behavioral data? And that's where we are today. Fast forward 6 years, we now work across Kenya, the Philippines, Mexico, and India. And we've now, lent money to over 6 million customers around our 4 markets.
Wow, that's a fantastic journey over 6 years' time. A lot to accomplish. And when you speak about credit worthiness, that's so important in determining, kind of where finance is distributed. And MM, this next question is for you. In a similar vein, what you do is really assess credit worthiness for collectives of farmers or different producers. But you do so in a little bit more of a different tilt. And in terms of Tala, it's more direct to consumer, focus on the individual. MM, you focus on bankability on kind of larger institutions or just larger groups. Can you speak a little bit in terms of what bankability and how they enable financing and enable to assess that credit worthiness through a technology platform?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I mean, this concept of credit worthiness is one of the biggest issues probably when it comes to access to finance, right? the lack of creditworthiness is the reason why most businesses can't actually access credit. It doesn't matter if they're MSME, if they're medium-sized company or corporate. It's the biggest issue that's out there. And for me, the definition of creditworthiness is part of the issue. So when I'm thinking about creditworthiness, in relation to emerging markets, as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't fly, which is why you have to think about these alternative methods, as has just been explained, looking at behavior, adding behavioral elements into there. For us, what we look at are other things. So sociological factors are really, really important. The reason why a business, the challenges a business may be having are very, very different in Nigeria. That's the reason why we have challenges that are in, Ghana or Kenya or Tanzania, because cultural and social factors are really, really important. Those nuances are just very, very different depending on where you're from. So we take that into account. It's not just looking at, the financials. When it comes to trade finance, which is what we focus on. So when it comes to trade finance, traditionally, those are the methods that are used. So it's looking at ratios that are used to measure, the financial worthiness of the business. But you do really have to take into account those very, as I said, those local nuances, which are very unique. And sometimes it's not even country. Sometimes it can be, regional as well within that particular country. So again, you have to be very cognizant of those, of those differences when you're in different markets, of things you need to look at that are very specific to those markets, and then build that into, the creditworthiness score or algorithm that you're building.
I guess a question back to both you, Shivani, and just as you think about you're in different markets, kind of probably fragmented markets and regions, as you said. Has technology helped bring these markets together, or at least provide a more seamless user experience?
Most definitely. I mean, it does. Technology basically means that you can be a lot more efficient, right? For a start-off. The fact is, I personally don't necessarily have to be on ground. Shivani doesn't necessarily have to be in India in order for her to do what she needs to do. Yes, you build technology, but remember that technology is only an enabler. Right, it's not the thing. What it does do is enable, our users to be able to get access to finance. But yeah, technology has definitely changed the game, just in the way you're able to actually, assess, assess individuals, whether they're consumers or whether they're businesses, for finance. In dealing with the place that the likes and things like machine learning have played in, how you're able to think about creditworthiness, etc. So technology has played a huge part, but as I said, as an enabler, yes. And also, I think one of the things that Shivani's also mentioned is mobile. That's made a huge difference, because where there is issues around digital apathy, well, these people who used to using mobiles on a day-to-day basis, so it's not a thing. So if you can build mobile into your solution, it makes life so much easier, because that is what they use day to day. It's not necessarily, even though we're B2B, we build a desktop solution, but it's a desktop solution that's mobile first, and we have to think of very mobile specific solutions, to encourage our users to use our solution.
Fantastic. So that's Brooke, pivoting to you a bit in terms of what Propel does and how you help low-income women in the U.S. Can you speak a little bit about Propel's mission when it comes to fresh EBT and how you've helped single mothers really manage their food benefits?
Yeah, for sure. We offer a free smartphone app called Fresh EBT that enables someone who gets food stamps to view their balance and see how much money they have left, and track their transaction history. So users can also manage offers and coupons and search for job opportunities to boost income in our app. And we are currently piloting a debit card as well, which would make us the first product to enable people who receive public benefits to view and manage their entire financial picture in one place, which is pretty cool. 80% of our users are women, and 79% have a child living under 18 at home. And in fact, the majority of our users have over 6 people living at home, which to me is a clear indication that women in particular, and particularly mothers of large families, find tremendous value in our app. And before Fresh EBT, our users had, in most states, had to call into an 800 number just to, confirm if their funds had been deposited into their account or to check their balance. On top of that, a lot of our users had developed these incredibly sophisticated systems to ensure that they could make it through the month every month, tracking in their head the coupons they have clipped, the cost of each bottle of formula, the amount of money that they need to borrow from a friend or a family member just to make it, through the remaining few days. And tracking everything like that in their head is really, it's a huge mental and emotional load to carry. So giving them an app that can help them keep track of all of these things in one place is really powerful. This is the same kind of experience and service that wealthier Americans have had access to for years now to help them manage their finances. We're just applying it to public benefits, and I think that's really powerful.
And you must have seen an increase of usage over the past year during the pandemic as things have really shifted to more of a digital space.
Yeah, for sure. We've seen usage go up by about 30%, and our user base has skyrocketed to over 5 million, highly engaged users. And technology in particular has really allowed us to do a bunch of really cool things for our users in the past year to help make their lives a bit easier, which I'd be happy to speak to if you want to go through.
That's great. And I think that, the use of technology really, as MM said, and you said, Brooke, in terms of building efficiencies, building access for women. I think we all tend to think of technology providing absolute positive benefits. Wynn would love to ask you, as the CEO of the European Banking Federation, you sit with a bird's eye view on all these banks in Europe. Would love to hear from your viewpoint, both sides of that coin. Right. So first, the positives of where you're seeing fintech really opening access for women as consumers, as well as some of the risks that you see in the marketplace, because with all positive comes a little bit of risk. And would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Thank you very much, Michelle. And you're absolutely right. The interesting thing about Europe is that it's very much a bank-financed economy, and there are quite a lot of banks. And especially, you also see cultural differences across Europe in access to finance. In my view, it all starts with financial literacy and financial education. And I started my career as a teacher, so I rolled into that by teaching to primary school kids once a year about money and finance. And interestingly, this is how I got in the family, because I have this simple giveaway, this simple piggy bank giveaway that you could write your savings objectives on, and the children would take that home and put it on the dinner table and would talk to their mother, to their father, and their family about how they saved and how they paid for the rent. And that got parents and notably also women, mothers, back to us asking for more information. And I think that is very important. But this was 2007, and if you look now in 2021. You see that a lot has happened, and my story is actually not so directly a story about finance. It is a story about the mobile phone, because I do think that the smartphone has opened up as a platform for access an incredible amount of opportunities, as we just heard. If you look at developing countries and the access that people now have to potentially a lot of things, including finance, is huge. So here is where, in my view, women can get over the gap that's there by attractive fintech. So you see quite a number of fintechs who are phone-based only, including, as we see today in this panel, many on credit. But there are also, in developing countries like India, there are credit lines, especially, and savings lines, especially made for illiterate people. So based on photographs rather than on text. Which also works. Then thirdly, there are, of course, a lot of crowdfunding platforms. It is, you create communities. By the smartphone, you potentially create communities, and communities can help finance each other's dreams. And it's what we earlier heard in the fireside chat, how incredibly important it is that people create networks, because I think that that is one of the important things where women can advance and help each other. And then finally, of course, with AI comes an opportunity and a risk, namely robo advice. In my view, again, AI can be, artificial intelligence can create a lot of opportunity in helping people make decisions. But one of the big risks, of course, is that if these algorithms are built by men, and most coders are men, that you're building unconscious bias, so that in the end it works against the emancipation of women rather than in favor of them. Then another risk that I see is with the apps come opportunities, but it is very important that you have the literacy, the financial literacy, to make the right decisions, because indeed apps are enablers. They don't make the decision for you. So I think that financial education, financial literacy, and financial inclusion programs, which together we all call financial health programs, are essential to enable women to use the new opportunities. And with that also come digital skills, of course. What I find, and then I come back to my unconscious bias, what I find another risk is that not enough founders of fintech are women. So you see that the opportunity to think from the situation, and we've heard, of course, in this panel, great examples, the way of thinking on how to help, on what women's needs specifically are, indeed in raising children, in being alone, in their entrepreneurship, in the network. It's very important that we also get more women on board. And I'll stop here. I'm happy to talk about all risks and opportunities, but in my view, the opportunity has never been so great.
So one thing that you touched upon was the use of mobile phones. And I think across all of our panelists today, mobile phones play a really big part in your business. You know, and open this question to everybody, but I think I want to start with Shivani, because Shivani, I remember we chatted about there are 1.8 million Android users. Of those Android users, I think you had said majority are male. So how do you solve that problem? How do you get to women if a lot of those users of mobile phones are male? You know, mobile phones become, our lifeblood for everybody. You know, I'm sitting here with mine. So how do we make sure that we're enabling equal access for everybody with that mobile?
Yeah, and actually, I don't know if maybe only I heard it. It's actually 1.8 billion Android devices in emerging markets alone. And you're totally right. And I do think it does vary by country. And so I think we've just had to kind of think about it as like all of the 4 countries that we're in, are we seeing any kind of skewing happen? And I think this goes to what we were just hearing in terms of not only how do we build a more inclusive funnel so that we can actually have women actually coming to us directly, but then from the aspect of how do we score them? How do we service them? We've had to also think about inclusivity as part of that. So that first piece in terms of how do we actually gain women's trust, or even become aware to them so that they can actually come to Tala. A few things that we've done. One, think about ways that if there is just one phone per household, how do we actually have it so that multiple accounts can be created within the same device? That's one aspect. The second aspect has been really thinking about kind of those barriers to trust. How do we get women to trust us? That for us was a lot around privacy and security. And so making sure, again, if we have multiple logins or even one login per device, how do we create that kind of security code or login code? We've heard so many times women that are in our portfolio actually sharing, nobody needs to know about this, and it's my relationship with Tala. And so again, if she receives access to capital, only she needs to know how much she's receiving. And so again, there's a little bit of a protection aspect there for the women we work with. We've also done a lot of partnerships in our markets where we're realizing we need to increase the amount of phones, to your point, that are actually in women's hands. And so how can we think about credit for devices as opposed to just credit, for working capital or consumption? And so creating methods for women to, again, be able to move from feature phones to Android devices. The last thing I think I'll mention is twofold. One, around scoring. So again, ensuring that we don't have any bias in our models. So again, taking away factors actually, or like location, thin files, thinking about new pathways, even within credit scoring for a woman who may not actually have a lot of data on her device to actually still be approved by us, and using kind of referrals or network models as different methods for that. And then the last thing is how we service them. And this goes into, again, I would say, one, increasing the kind of products that we offer. And so, now Tala has actually gone beyond credit and offered a full kind of financial account to our customers, having a debit card, a savings card, insurance in some cases. And so there are different ways that Tala can now interact with a woman as opposed to just the credit relationship. And then the last piece is how we service. So we know 85% of the world is still cash-based. And so, again, not keeping everything digital. I think that's the big thing we've learned along the way, is that while we are all reliant now, on Android and, kind of digital financial services, to really make it work for the underserved women and emerging markets, we do really need to have a both digital as well as offline mechanism to interact with our customers.
Fantastic, thank you. I would love to pivot to the focus on women leaders. I've heard from each one of you the importance of having women as part of that decision-making conversation. 7% of global fintech leaders are female. So that is a single-digit number. We have 2 sitting here right now. You probably make up, part of that percentage. It is a big problem, and it is as part of one of the UN empowerment principle is, how do you include more women in that seat? How do you build more inclusivity as you're building product and thinking about designing services for women, right? As at Tala, you're designing all these services, insurance and banking. You're doing it with women in mind. In order to really be able to do that, you need to probably have a woman at top who's thinking through that experience. We'd love to hear from any of you, really, what how you bring that woman inclusivity internally in your firm. Perhaps, Wim, if we can start with you, because I know you've done a lot of work at the European Banking Federation to really bring women in across all levels, and then also working with the 3,500 banks that you have within the Federation to do the same.
Yes, thank you very much. And it has been a journey, and it started on women empowerment principles with a role model for me, European Commissioner Maria Gabriel, who started the Digital for Her initiative to get more women into coding, into tech and into coding. And I signed that as a federation, and she is still very inspiring in exactly how to make practical, how to get women in the place where they can contribute and work. Secondly, and that is for many of the banks and many European banks quite an important step, principles for responsible banking. Quite a number of banks, and especially the bigger banks, have signed the principles for responsible banking, and several are relevant because if you look at Goal 5, it is gender equality. It's of course in favor of gender equality. Goal 8, decent work and economic growth, and Goal 9, industry, innovation and infrastructure. Now, we signed the women empowerment principles, and when I read them first time, I thought, and this is the interesting thing, how can you not sign them? And it is a little bit of a Trojan horse the way I did it, because I signed them as an employer, because I didn't want to have the agreement of the 3,500 banks before I could sign. But by signing them as an employer, it put myself on the spot in my organization, because we took the principles and went through every part, every procedure in our own organization, but also we promote, and both with federations, countries, but also with banks. So I'm happy that, for instance, today the Luxembourg Banking Association, including its banks, have signed the Women Empowerment Principles, and last year already the Belgian Banking Association, and then there are a number of bigger banks. So what I love so much about the Women Empowerment Principles, they are like a small snowball rolling down the hill and becoming like an avalanche, because they offer so much and so much as a benchmark to work on.
Thank you, Vim. Perhaps if you could give your thoughts, because I know, you have where bankability operates is, very male dominant areas of Africa. And probably, a challenge that you face, one as a female founder yourself, but also bringing females on board either internally or throughout your process in terms of providing finance to women. But to what your experience is there.
Yeah, so I think I'll talk a little bit about in terms of what we're actually doing, for our users and our customers, actually. So yeah, I mean, because we're very much so heavily focused in agriculture, and very much so soft commodities. In this particular sector, it's a really strange one, because there are a lot of women who are in the farming sector. But when you look at the owners of the land, so you tend to get the women who are way further down the value chain. So they are the ones, they probably do some sowing, but they definitely do all the harvesting. They'll do the picking, the drying, etc. And they will take product to the local markets and sell to local markets. And then you suddenly get to agents and brokers, and then it's all male. Well, if you're looking at who are the ones who are actually getting the deals and who are the ones who are actually selling, especially if you're selling to international markets, regional markets, whatever, when it comes to the bigger deals, they're all men. So then the question for us is, well, what are we going to do in order to kind of bring the women along? So we start to see more female agents and more female brokers, and they're the ones who are getting, the deals in regional and international markets. So we're working, we're partnering with trade associations basically to do this. And actually, I'm kind of heading out next week to go and trial this. So what we're actually doing is we're working with trade associations, so as they come together as cooperatives and bring these women together so they can collectively start, they do this already to a certain extent, but they can collectively come together, but actually then to start to sell, at scale. Because what we've found is, especially going to trade and professional organizations, a lot of the time, when they, help the women to get access to market, yes, they'll take them to trade events. And it's great. They'll go to these trade shows, they'll get an order. And then the feedback we always get is, yeah, but we've got an order, but they can't actually execute it. And it's like, because they can't get access to finance. It's like, okay, so how do we enable that to happen? How do we enable the women to be able to, execute that particular deal? Or how do we help, a collective of women to come together and then start to sell at scale? So this is where we're working with trade and professional organizations to do exactly that. And when it comes to commodities, that means that, we kind of have a long-term view on that. So, we start off with, right, okay, so if you're able to get a deal, this probably isn't going to be women in the first. So this will be somebody, somebody a little bit higher up in the trade association who's able to get that deal. Okay, you've got a deal internationally. We'll service that in order to get you access to credit. But then, in year two, how about you think about, getting a warehouse facility, because you can use that for purposes collateral in year three. What about thinking go further up the value chain, making sure wherever you've got that actual warehouse facility, you've also got you've got enough land to build a processing plant. So we need to get women into the processing, the processing business. Yes, there are, some that do that, but if you tend to go into the hinterlands, you tend to get a lot of that. So how do we get women into processing? And then again, at what point do we then start to get women into becoming agents and brokers, and who are able to actually are the ones who are able to instigate these large deals? We're actually building a particular vehicle instrument, a financial instrument. That means that they will be able to do that. So as long as they manage to get a deal, and we will partner, partner with a number of businesses, not just trade finance, in order to give them access to market, what we need to be do is we're able to actually fund it as they're going along. And we, you know, the way we've built the platform, and we design it along, you know, along the lines of thinking, okay, what are the things that they're missing in terms of knowledge? How do we, you know, build that in by design? So I always talk about governance by design, because the G word is not necessarily the most friendly word on the continent, before we even talk about ESG, you know, E and the S. But governance is the first thing we need to tackle. How do we build in governance by design? So we're not constantly talking about the fact that, oh, we need to build a capacity building program for these women. I always kind of think, enough of capacity building. Let's actually start get them doing, rather than just trying to constantly teach them things which, from an output perspective and in terms of moving them forward, doesn't really move them that far. So, you know, yeah, for us, the focus is in, let's start to move, you know, a lot faster down the road, and, you know, and do it in bigger leaps and bounds to get them to positions where they're the ones in charge to, as I said, execute the deals.
Yeah, it's definitely, you know, the pipeline issue of having women presence in every single cross point of that pipeline. You know, it's a big problem we need to solve, and it's one that we're going to continue. I think, as someone said, you know, even though it's International Women's Day, we're still in a male-dominated world. But Brooke, would love to hear from you in terms of, you know, as you manage financial partnerships in the U.S., you know, you probably see this as it relates to Fresh EBT and what you're trying to solve for women. How are you seeing, you know, kind of the theme, the financial partnerships working out for Propel, and as they're trying to develop products for kind of, I guess, women in general?
Yeah, the thing that's so interesting is, you know, one thing I was thinking about this morning even was, like, one of our key partners is our bank sponsor, Sutton Bank, who is this teeny bank in a teeny town, you know, one stoplight town in the middle of Ohio. They would never be able to reach the, you know, 5 million plus users and women that we serve. But because of our partnership, you know, we're able to offer these women FDIC insured, you know, bank backed debit cards, and they're able to access and serve and bank these women. And it's a pretty cool partnership for that reason. And we're able to do it, you know, we have kind of two not so secrets to our secret sauce that give us, you know, access. One, as Shivani mentioned, is the trust that we've been able to build with our users. We're so tapped into our user base, into their needs and their concerns, and we work really hard to serve them across a number of different products and services. So they trust us and they stay really engaged with us. And the second thing is our technology, which we keep talking about. You know, it's relatively simple technology, but it enables us to serve, you know, women across all 50 states at scale in a highly engaged and low cost way, and continue to kind of find tangential services to add on to that through the pandemic and deepen our relationships with these women. So that's sort of the win-win that we've found from a partnership perspective that I think is pretty cool.
Fantastic. Well, we have about 10 more minutes, and I wanted to open up to questions that we have, and I've seen a number of those coming through. I did want to hear, you know, from each of you in terms of, you know, we've been through a really tough year. But with tough years comes innovation as well. I think someone had said, quote, don't waste a pandemic or don't waste a crisis, right? Like, what are the innovations that can come through from a crisis? And the next panel will speak to that very specifically, but would love to hear from each one of you in terms of, you know, not what was really experienced from last year, but what have we seen that really that pushes that innovation and that pushes that new thinking for something that we can do better. Anyone can start.
I can go really quick. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, please.
Well, actually, Michelle, so that was a quote that we used internally. Our CFO, a woman as well, said that as soon as we entered the pandemic, she said, listen, we need to have a continuous learning and testing mindset. And so we know we're going to go through a challenging time, but again, never waste a crisis. And so we did come out actually much stronger as a team. And and with stronger product experience. I think this actually goes back to potentially us as women, running these companies, but kind of being really open to the idea of learning from everywhere. And so our customers are, constantly facing volatility in their daily lives. This is actually the norm for them. And so we actually took it in a different way and said, rather than build for them, how about we talk to them during this crisis and actually understand how are they withstanding the issues that are coming, out of this. And we started to realize that there were key things, but there was a lot of resiliency. And actually what they were looking for was relationship. They were looking for ways that they could then navigate their own, financial lives. It's a lot of what Brooke was mentioning. It's like, if we can give customers not only access, but actually choice and more control over their financial life, in some ways, they then have the financial agency to actually be able to pursue what they want with money. I think the only other thing I would mention is that what we also saw during COVID was a lot of the acceleration of, especially in emerging markets, around digital finance. We saw governments finally opening up to it and actually pushing financial inclusion agendas. And then we also saw the fact that there was an over-reliance on cash. And so there was this need and this pull, even from the customer, actually saying, okay, I need safe places to keep my money and safe ways and easier ways to actually move my money. And that's a lot of what I think we started to respond to after doing an enormous amount of just conversations with women around the world to understand how they were navigating the crisis.
Yeah. I personally think that is spot on. What you see during a pandemic or any crisis is that finance and households get reacquainted with the bank, because now you see that many people are under acute pressure and supported by government guarantees. And what they need is trusted advice. So rather than being far away, they turn to their banks, to their local banks. And you see also that banks become less corporate, are more reaching out to people, because they realize that they will create excessive debt. And only if you have a conversation going on in very early set, and that involves the whole family, not only because they need to be more creative with it. So the first is that you see behavior of finance change and being more into advice, but also realizing that you need every part of the family. The second is that everybody went digital overnight. So many banks that were reluctant to deal with digital finance, suddenly everything was possible. And I say the same from governments. I really hated it when at the end of a digital meeting, you always had to print out something and sign it and then go to a branch. But now things are suddenly possible at the digital level. And here you get the opportunity. We need to deal with this crisis and recover that. That means that we need to stay very close to our customers and enable our customers to get more renewed prosperity. And you do that indeed by offering digital tools, but also by reaching out. And by, for instance, in Europe, what you see is that the European Commission has a program on capital markets, on getting access of everybody to capital markets. And I do believe that digital and financial literacy will work a lot. So there's a lot of volatility, but you also see also a lot of togetherness and digital innovation.
One thing, Michelle, that I think has frustrated me for a long time with fintech and some of the traditional players is that there's this tendency to want to overhaul the entire system and say, we need $10 billion in 10 years and to start from the ground up and fix everything. And I think the pandemic kind of added this variable to the mix that of time. We don't have time. We were hearing from our users, the grocery stores are emptying out of toilet paper. I can't afford to stock up. I don't get my benefits deposit for 2 more weeks. What am I supposed to do right now? And so adding that variable of time to the mix really helped force us to innovate and find partnerships with, we had this great partnership with Give Directly that I think is the largest private direct cash transfer program to date. We've distributed $180 million directly to users through our platform, and we've been able to leverage our technology to identify and verify the identity of these women and get them money as quickly as possible. And we've also been able to just notice that, traditional channels for distributing even information were breaking down as a result of the pandemic. A lot of government agencies work or use to distribute information sort of in very face-to-face methods. And so by having a trusted relationship with users on their mobile device, we were able to create this, it's pretty simple, but a benefits information center where we've seen in last year, like 4.2 million women downloaded their non-filer tax form through our app alone in order to get their economic stimulus payment. And that was a result of just consolidating information across agencies in one place in our app and making it more easy for them to access more quickly.
Thank you. I mean, I think it's pretty amazing just to think through, with a little bit of pressure, innovation really it goes a warp speed mode. And I think that's a benefit to a lot of women and just people in general. MM, any last words on that?
I mean, the only thing I'd like to say is, some of the issues that you normally have around apathy when it comes to digital, especially when it comes around to trust. So I think, again, Shivani mentioned it earlier, of trust, right? And I don't know if it's specifically emerging markets where there is always that lack of trust. I know that, across sub-Saharan Africa, it's a really big issue, especially when you're asking for what is essentially very private information. You're asking for information within businesses that literally they're very reluctant to give access to. But in this instance, because the pandemic has put people in a situation where it's like, actually, we really do need working capital. If you're not able to trade because you're not able to get access to your buyers that you would normally have, then how on earth are you going to be able to then fund your existing workers? So that in itself is, made, for us from a timing perspective is, absolutely crucial that all of a sudden everybody wants to talk to us, because it's like, well, we don't care if it's digital. We just need, access to money. And also because the banks, unlike Europe, the banks, have become a lot more risk adverse, because for them, what they can't see is, well, if you haven't got buyers, how are we going to be able to see our capital, at the end of it? So risk aversion is become a bigger issue for local banks, which means that everybody's got to start to look for alternative ways of being able to get access to money. And I think this is where it's benefited, anybody that's kind of, in this particular sector of trade finance, whether it's, invoice discounting or receivables, whatever it is, digital product, it's like, we want to have the conversation. If you're going to give us access, then we're willing to do it the digital way.
Yeah. Well, fantastic. Thank you to our panelists. This has been such an interesting conversation, and one I've always personally just learned so much just having a global view, and love hearing the stories. And I thank you all for the work that you do. Happy International Women's Day to everyone. Again, Choose to Challenge is this year's theme. Now I'd love to pass the torch over to Anna Falk, who is the head of UN Empowerment Principles, for our next panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I'm very excited to take over the torch. It's been an amazing conversation this morning, from the opening session to the fireside chat and the panel that we just heard. And I'm very excited to have three amazing women here in this panel. I'm Anna Falk, and I'm heading the Women's Empowerment Principles Secretariat and also the EU-funded program that drives gender equality and women's empowerment in G7 countries. And it's very much needed. There's no gender equality anywhere in the world at this point. And that's why we have focused on markets like Canada, US, UK, the European Union, to really focus in on driving gender equality for everyone. Just as a starter, this panel will focus on three categories of women: women in the labor market, women in the marketplace, and women in the community. So also it will be a focus on consumers. And before we enter into the conversation, I'd like to highlight some very astounding figures from 2020 and what the COVID pandemic has brought to women. 47 million more women have been pushed into poverty as a result of COVID-19. And we now see 435 million women and girls living on less than $1.90 a day. We also have seen shocking figures of domestic violence as the confinement and staying at home really hit, and we could see in some markets 40 to 50% increase of domestic violence. And about 243 million women and girls from 15 to 49 was subjected to sexual and physical violence by an intimate partner last year. These are shocking figures. We will not only talk about the bad, we'll also talk about some of the good things that came out of last year. But before we do so, I'd also like to touch upon the US, that the women are making up about 43% of the workforce, but accounted for 56% of COVID-related job losses. So to keep that in mind, while we're also asking our panelists to see a positive spin, what has the COVID pandemic generated? And we heard a little bit from the previous panel that it had elements of innovation. It had women taking on additional, getting additional access to internet and therewith finance. So we'll talk about some of these things, but let me first ask the amazing panelists to briefly introduce themselves. We'll start with Viola Llewellyn, who is the president and co-founder of Ovamba Solutions. And Viola, you have presence in a number of countries, from Cameroon to Cote d'Ivoire, Mauritius, India, Egypt, you name it. You have a global presence, and you're focusing also on the informal sector. So maybe just briefly introduce yourself and Ovamba Solutions.
Thank you so much, Anna. It's great to be with everybody and the panelists. My name is Viola Llewellyn. I'm the co-founder and president of Ovamba Solutions. Can you guys hear me properly? There's a really bad feedback echo.
There is a feedback. Maybe we can ask all the panelists to mute while Corbett is speaking.
Any better? Okay. Again, I'm so glad to be here with everybody. I'm not quite sure what the scoop is here. Why don't you go on to somebody else and I'll see whether or not if it's at my side. I don't think it is, but let's try.
Okay, so mute yourself. Okay. So we'll go over to Sheena Allen, who is the CEO of the startup Capway. And Capway is a neobank, so maybe you could just touch a little bit what that is about. Over to you, Sheena.
Hi, I'm Sheena Allen. I'm the founder and CEO of Capway. We are a financial technology startup, but the core of what we do is mobile banking. We are a neobank. Specifically, we focus on mainly unbanked and underbanked, with our thesis being around filling the financial gaps that have been left by traditional banking. And so that is the focus that we do and what we do in regards to checking, savings, and other aspects around neobanking.
Thank you very much. Eliane Chikanda from Stash. You are the Director of Banking Operations. Over to you.
Yes, thank you, Anna. Yes, I'm Eliane. I'm the Director of Banking Operations at Stash. And as many of you probably know, Stash is a personal financial app that really helps Americans make investing easy and affordable for them. So we do have a banking section on the app, and as well as an investment platform. So I'm so glad to be part of this event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eliane. Viola, let's try you again. Let's try your connection, and everybody mutes. I think you're muted now, so.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Much better. Yes, much better. Thank you.
Hi, I'm so sorry. I was going to say I'm the founder of a tech company, but I can't figure out how to use online systems. But besides that, it's great to be with everybody. Was thrilled to be excited by Nasdaq. As the co-founder and president of Avamba Solutions, Inc., we are an innovator of trade tech solutions for Africans SMEs, small and medium enterprises that are often driven by the activities of women who hold up majority of GDP in Africa's nations. Our company innovates these solutions because as we were a startup 8 years ago, the first thing we realized is that although Africa is open for growth, open for business, the ecosystem doesn't quite work for financial inclusion. So everything that we develop is based on driving trade and manufacturing for small and medium enterprises who cannot get standard loans. And we do that by including trade and inventory at the center of those transactions, which has a beneficial impact on women. I'm really glad to be here.
Great. So while we have a good connection for you, let's go over to the first question. So Viola, as you just mentioned, you're working with small businesses. How have they been hit by the crisis, by the pandemic and the economic crisis that followed? And you mentioned a little bit about the ecosystems in your markets. What was the specific impact on women in small business?
Certainly. I'm going to be speaking from the perspective of Cameroon, Ivory Coast, and other places where we've seen an uptick, not just in businesses looking to us for help with funding and finance, but we're also seeing a lot of traction with policymakers, central banks, and normal banks within the African continent. The impact on what's happened here is we found that a lot of the banks were not ready to be digitized. But we also realized that part of the problem with Africa as a whole is being able to verify numbers. So I actually don't think I believe a lot of the numbers that I've seen about the impact to women, but I can tell you what I've experienced and what I've perceived and what my team reports back to me. Now, first of all, it's interesting that Africa's impact with COVID is very different from the rest of the world. And I also tell people that we've had a lot to deal with as it relates to things like Ebola. So the human being on the continent and their ability to deal with illness is very different from what you may have heard and what's reported. And numbers are crucially unreported, which affects women specifically within the COVID pandemic. It affects them because it means that central banks, and other financial services providers do not know how to quantify and design for how many women going through what. That information is not there as well as it should be. However, what Avamba has done in the markets where we are operating is we've escalated and ramped up the solutions that we've developed for trade, warehousing, inventory, and we have stepped up working with investors who see this as a great way in which to be part of Africa's growth story. So it's the very simple answer to that is women are doing what everybody else around the world is doing, taking care of other people, putting themselves at risk, finding out ways to maintain their businesses during a massive downturn. But the great thing about that is companies like Avamba looking at other ways to push manufacturing on the continent and to find new ways to approach broken supply chain opportunities. Thank goodness we've got the timing of the African Continental Free Trade Zone, which puts Africa as a major trade zone for the rest of the world to interact with. But it means that following on from COVID, learning how to design disaster recovery, we need to make sure that women are presented in what will happen once COVID is really a historic pandemic that has had such a devastating effect on everybody.
Great. No, thank you so much. You said that there was an uptake also among policymakers. Something you'd like to add on that?
Yes, very quietly, policymakers have found that within Africa's growth trajectory, hearing common language amongst everyday people about things like quantitative easing or ensuring that money that was put aside by the large donors, IMF, IFC, that it is distributed properly through the banks. And it's the same problem that we've had here in the United States. I happen to live in Maryland. So distributing capital earmarked to help businesses sustain. I very much doubt that much of that has made its way to your average woman running either a wholesale or retail business, and helping policymakers get clear understanding and visibility into the far reaches of most African nations and their economies is something that fintech solutions need to come to the table with, because banks are not entrepreneurs, neither are they innovators. Even though we see banks, some banks trying to develop entrepreneurial capabilities, I'm excited by what Ovamba and the rest of the team have developed to say, here is a lesson in what has happened. Here's what disaster recovery and disaster prevention looks like. And here's what you have not been able to innovate that we want to help you with so that we can have full inclusion the way we were getting right before March of last year. So that's the role of the policymakers. They need help.
Great. Thank you so much, Viola. So we'll shift gear and we'll head back to the US, where we have Sheena from Capway and Eliane from Stash, to talk a little bit about their consumer-facing platforms, offering banking and investment services to customers. And maybe you could talk a little bit about how your apps, the use of your apps, have changed as a result of COVID. And have you gotten new customers? Are there new consumers that are joining you that you see as a result of COVID-19? And do you see any trends from the unbanked to banked people in the US specifically? Maybe we'll start with you, Sheena.
Yes, well, you know, our goal from the beginning. So the idea of Capway came in actually 2016. We didn't actually start building our platform until 2019, but the idea for Capway, for me from the beginning as a founder, came because I lived in the banking desert in Mississippi. So I grew up where there weren't any banks, or you had to travel to miles or 30 minutes to an hour to get to a bank, and or you were more surrounded by predatory options. And so that was a world that I grew up in anyway. And so in starting Capway, the purpose of it was to say, hey, we're going to move to a cashless economy sooner than later. When I was in Austin or LA, there were already places that would not take cash. It would be debit or credit only. And so what I was saying then in 2016, 2017, hey, eventually it's going to be more and more places that's going to say we don't take cash. And that was really why we started Capway anyway. Now, I did not predict that COVID-19 was going to happen, but I did predict and say that the cashless economy was coming sooner than later. And so when you looked at banking deserts, areas that had high populations of unbanked, underbanked residents, tier 2, tier 3 cities, they were not going to be ready. And that's what happened when COVID-19 happened. You had a huge population of unbanked, underbanked Americans, and we were not ready as a country for it. Because for one, either some of us thought that everybody in America was banked, or it was when stimulus checks came out, that's when it kind of woke up everyone to say, hey, not everyone has a bank account. How are we going to give them, their stimulus checks? And so for us, it wasn't necessarily that we changed audiences. If anything, it just, I think, awoken people around us to why we were doing what we were doing. So like I say, when we were speaking unbanked, underbanked in 2016, 2017, most people, it was very new to a lot of people. Whereas now it's way more trendy. So but it wasn't new for us. This was something that we've been talking about for a while. And that came just from our personal experience of growing up in a desert. So our audience did not change. If anything, it increased because people who were previously unbanked, underbanked, who weren't as quick to run out and get a bank for various reasons, not trusting, not having one nearby, they were now more open and needed a bank. So they were quicker to trust a mobile bank.
Thank you. So I think you mentioned also something about single mothers, that you see that they have a specific need and that you are targeting their needs.
Yeah, so when you think of unbanked, underbanked, specifically for us, why single mothers was a big area, is because you still had a lot of people who were unbanked, underbanked, who said, hey, I will just wait, my 6 to 8 weeks or however long to get my check in the mail. They were still not willing to put, their social security number in a mobile app, in order to start a bank account or get an account with the neobank. But But specifically for single mothers, their need was different, because for them, it came down to, I need my money quicker because I have to feed my kids. You know, kids weren't in school, so they're at home. You know, I don't know the number exactly, but there was an article that came out that spoke about how many kids were going hungry because literally they were being fed when they went to school. And when they weren't in school, they were home. So I think this more on single mothers, either they're having to not go to work, or they're trying to work from home while also doing their virtual learning for their kids. Their kids are needing food. Their kids are having needs. And those single mothers needed that money. And so they couldn't afford to wait the 6 weeks, the 8 weeks, the 14 weeks that some people who were still not trusting of banks could wait. And so they were much quicker to also come and get a bank account with the neobank, because once again, they needed that money as fast as they could, and they couldn't afford to wait those 6 weeks or 8 weeks to get that stimulus in the mail.
Great, thank you. Let's hear from Eliane from Stash, your perspective on this issue.
Sure. Thanks, Anna. But before I start, though, I just wanted to really I want to thank the New York City Fintech Women, the UN Women, and Nasdaq for really hosting this wonderful event. And I'm so glad to be sitting here in the panel alongside those two amazing women. So thank you for that. So in terms of the use of the Stash app that has changed with the pandemic, we've been lucky enough to experience incredible growth over the past year. Stash. We now have roughly about 5 million customers using our platform, and we just surpassed about 2.6 billion in AUM, asset under management. But one thing I want to highlight, and I'm very proud at Stash, is the way we never falter in supporting our customers amid the many financial challenges of the pandemic. So we continually to constantly provide education and guidance on topics from how to apply for unemployment to what to do with your stimulus checks. So one of the changes, but I think it's important to highlight that and to recognize, is the way our customers were able to tap into the emergency funds that they've built over the years Stash during this global pandemic. I think, in fact, amid the many market swings of the last spring, we saw roughly 50% increase in really customer using our automated savings tools to really ride out the highs and the lows. And I think this really is a testament of our strength as Stash to really have a strategy of a long-term investment philosophy versus the day-to-day trading that we see in the market.
Great, thank you. I have another question for you, Eliane. So maybe you could go a little bit deeper into the trends that you been seeing at Stash and how women are investing in banking in general, and the more kind of different use that you've been witnessing over this time.
Yeah, so right now at Stash, our customer base is composed about 60% men and 40% women. But 2020, as I mentioned, was a record growth at Stash. And nearly 50% of our new customers last year were women. This is really indicative of the growing female customer base on the platform. But I think historically, we've seen that, right? Despite the common misconception that women don't buy and sell stocks, women customers Stash take on the same amount of risk as the men counterpart. And as well as women also maintain a very diversified portfolio. In fact, I was looking at some data before the call, and I realized that women are most likely, I can say, keep the cool during more prevalent situation. In fact, during the peak of the pandemic, I think between March and July, for example, men were 17% more likely to panic sell compared to women. So when the market kind of dropped up a lot of the pandemic, we saw men running and wanting to sell the investment. However, women were more likely to keep their cool and to just keep those investments. And even furthermore, I think women actually purchased more investment during COVID. Not only they purchase more investment during COVID against men, but as well as they diversify. You'll see women investing more in ETFs, instead of single stock, and you see more men investing in single stock. So that really shows the testament of women really getting into the stock market, investment, and having really good strategies and diversification when it comes to investing. So that's the trend that we saw during this pandemic.
And you saw also did you see anything in regards to the fact that many people started to buy online, that also kind of had more women getting bank accounts and getting ready to those online sales?
Yeah, as you know, one of the downside of COVID is the increase in online shopping, right? As the country closed, we see more and more people wanting to shop online. And we saw also an increase in banking enrollment because a lot of customers don't have a debit card or credit card to make purchases online. So they rely on cash. I think Sheena mentioned that the same way with her company, right? So we saw a really increase in our customer base, especially women. As you know, in the household, historically, right, we're good at finances, right? Women are good at paying the bills and doing the budget. So we did see that an increase in women going to our app and really getting that bank account and debit card to make sure they do the online purchases.
So those changes that you all have mentioned, and I see that's where in the introduction I was also talking a little bit about the silver lining of this crisis. Do you see those changes being irreversible? Like, do you see that those that are now banked, those that are now going online, those that are using more online, fintech, do you think they will continue to do so? Or do you think there's a risk of reversing these changes? And I'm asking all of you.
I don't think that I'm having a hard time thinking about it from that perspective, Anna, because what we're beginning to see, especially in a digital age of human evolution, is that digital doesn't go backwards. And just about everything that we do, even for those who feel that they are unincluded, and I'm not talking about banking specifically, they get swept up. It is very difficult to stay outside of adoption. It is very difficult to live a life that is arranged around you with these kinds of tools. So I think that the changes that we've experienced and that we've seen are the beginning of what everybody likes to call the new normal. I actually absolutely bloody hate that phrase because we're always in a continuum. And the more that we see these kinds of disasters happening, the more we will see abrupt changes. And there is no disaster that goes to waste, as they say. It always leads to some sort of invention due to the need to use innovation to survive something or to get through something, address or improve. I heard somebody on a previous panel discussing the displeasure around the idea that fintech will replace banks. And I happen to agree with her, and I didn't used to, because we all thought, here comes a new revolution, everybody gets swept up in it. But that's not what really happens. We're in an age of collaboration. Even the what this year's International Women's Day is about tells us quite clearly that we're looking for challenge, we're looking for collaboration. And that's because that's exactly what we go through. I think that this is the new baseline. I don't think we're going to go backwards. I think that we're instead going to evolve forward, and this will become a historic event. I'd love to hear what my co-panelists actually think as well.
No, thank you so much, Viola. I like that digital doesn't go backwards, which means that investment in digital and access is something that sticks. So Eliane or Sheena, anything to add to this?
No, I totally agree. I think if you see, even historically, if we see, I remember when I started my career, we would never think, right, that people will not want to go to a physical branch to bank. Right, as we change our mindset and we change the way we look at banking, I don't think we'll go backwards. So I definitely agree with Viola on that. I think we're just going to move forward into that.
Yeah, I'll say speaking from even from like an unbanked, underbanked, or an underserved perspective, or I would even say overlooked. If anything, now people are more trusting or at least willing to give fintech an opportunity. I think it's also evident even from, if you look at it even from an investment lens. You know, investors are investing, I think, at a higher rate than ever before in fintech. But everybody talks about the bubble. I do think it's rightfully so. I think fintech is going to bring things to the table that it's not gonna be reversed when we're coming post-pandemic. So as far as being cashless, I think there's a lot of people who are going to say, hey, this cashless thing worked. X, Y, and Z was better. We're going to stick to being cashless. Or you're going to see tier 2 and tier 3 cities now who have access to innovation when they were overlooked before, and they had to get access to innovation in order to survive during COVID. So if anything, I think it has exposed an audience or has exposed different ways that fintech will I won't say replace, I'll say collaborate. Can collaborate with more traditional financial services. So in no way do I think we're going backwards. I think once again, it says expose a different opportunity, expose a different level of innovation, and we're going to continue down this road.
I think you're so right, Selma and Eliane. In fact, isn't it a little bit like music and fashion and shoes? You don't actually throw out the stuff, and now that we're older and we look at what we used to steal and throw out from our mothers, and you regret, like, bloody hell, those things are back again. But I think, especially as women in technology and innovation, we do tend to look backwards for inspiration to see what worked in order to figure out what else can be innovated for ease and to, in your case, about the unbanked and having a cashless society. But for Africans, and Eliana, forgive me if I'm including you in this, I know you're with Stash, for us, innovation is about bring as much visibility to reduce as much paper, to remove as much so-called missing facts so that we can stop living comfortably in disarray in the hopes that we can hide the things we either don't want to deal with or that which is corrupting society, which women frequently the victims of. Sorry, that was my 2 cents.
Thank you, Viola. So I think in the previous panel, and also there's been some hint to it in your remarks so far about financial education and the importance of getting women onto fintech solutions. Maybe we could take a round. Sheena, would you like to start and just talk briefly about how you see financial education and playing a role for getting women onto your fintech solutions?
Yeah, so as I mentioned at Capway, one thing that we focus on is filling financial gaps, and the information gap is one of those areas. And so we're really big on giving out, we have an entire content arm to Capway, and that is giving out information that we know is needed. When I started Capway, I was very, very adamant that we were going to have a banking side to us, but we had to have a content side to us. And when a lot of investors or people ask why, I said there's been a gap there. So we have this thing where we speak financial literacy, and we've been speaking financial literacy for years and years. But the issue is if I give you education, but I don't give you the financial tools to put your education to use, there's a gap there. But it's also the reverse. If I give you money, but I don't give you information of what to do and how to properly use the money, there's also a waste. And so as time goes forward, we're seeing more and more people being interested in getting the information needed to go forward financially. And that's a big part of what we do at Capway. So from articles to videos to interviews to the whole nine, we're really, really big on pushing financial education.
Thank you. Viola?
So true. Education is important. I'll go a step further based on the experiences that we had at Ovamba. I have come to realize that for certain groups of customer base, education has to go with disrupting them personally. Even when we hire, having to de-educate or unravel certain thinking, and for women in the finance arena, getting to understand that there are alternatives other than a straight loan from your bank and microfinance institution is the biggest learning dissemination that we've ever had to do. And because of the way the African market is with all of that colonial footage and baggage from the past, we choose to try to educate on the financial front and incorporate language. There is no, you're almost wasting time if you cannot speak the language of your customer base. And for us, we find that we educate our customers better in their own native languages versus French, English, or Arabic. because people express themselves and absorb and use information better when it is germane and native to how they think. Our customers aren't using big four accounting firms or completing balance sheets, but they do know their business. The education, therefore, is at us, the fintech innovators. We're the ones that need to learn what is important for our customer base so that we can innovate in a way to take them down a path that we need them to take, which is how to look at alternatives and not just think that lending is the only way in which you can get money to grow. So the entire education arena becomes huge, hugely important, and is very circular in its orientation.
Great, thank you. Leanne?
Yeah, so I think financial education plays a pivotal role, right, in getting more women to adopt fintech solution. And as Stash, though, we were well aware, right, of the ways financial service industry has historically catered just to a select few versus to the vast majority. And we all see as a result, though, it's very difficult for women, BIPOC population and lower income Americans to really invest and build wealth. So as I shared earlier at the beginning of the conversation, I shared that women are increasingly using our platform as Stash. And we were able to do that, though, by having a really, I would say, easy to understand education and guidance. So we specifically built a section dedicated to financial education in our app, right? Through our Learn articles, automated savings and budgeting, and alongside with very personalized insights. And I think it also comes down to trust, right? The customer needs to trust us to give them all the resources and tools for them to be able to make sound decisions about their finances. So I think financial education, I think it's key, right, to helping not only women, but to help customers in the whole with the fintech solutions.
Thank you so much for this. And I just reflect back on what Wim said in the previous panel, that his story was not that of a finance story, but it was that of a mobile phone story, and how the tech and the mobile really kind of brings the financial solutions to life. And we did see, and something that I'd like everyone to keep in mind is the cyber violence that are happening. And we saw during the pandemic in the UK, just from February to March, an increase of 50% of cyber harassment and cyberbullying online. And we know that those are deterrents for women to stay online and seek digital solutions. So I'd like for us to keep this in mind, that while we also do financial education, that we also give them a sense of security online. And what was also a shocking figure, and I feel like I'm the one with the bad news and you are the guys with the good news, but we saw an increase also in the lockdown of the cyber violence in Australia of 50%. So it is something to take seriously and to go with the digital and the financial hand in hand as we are developing such financial education programs. I'd like to move a little bit towards recommendations. And Viola, you have some recommendations specifically on women's livelihoods and specifically for COVID, and how you see the different solutions being developed for the formal versus the informal sector, and any reflections on that?
Gosh, too many, but let me try to distill my thoughts correctly. At one point, I used to think that the whole point of fintech was to take the informal and make them all formal. I no longer believe that. And I may change my mind again in the future. After all, that's what all smart leaders do. They evaluate the information at the time, make a decision, and leave themselves open to see how it's going to develop. So as it relates to tools for the informal and tools for the formal, they are vastly different. But the goal of both of those groups is the same: access to capital in order to grow. And in the case of women specifically, develop a platform of wealth for their families that can be transferred to the next generation. So for the informal sector, that's all about helping them develop a business and the confidence to know that You can go from what you've got now, as long as you know what the defined path is. Our job as fintech innovators is to provide you with the democracy of choice and access to growth. For the formal sector, they still want the same things: growth, transferable wealth, and the ability to be successful in life. What do we offer that type of a group? We offer them another version of expanded options in order to gain the same thing, an opportunity. Most women, regardless of their industry, will usually tell you the same thing. If the opportunity is made available, I will take it. If the opportunity had been there, I would have taken it. Both of these groups need the same thing. The delivery conduit may be different. It might even be that with the informal sector in particular, that entire learning curve needs to be consistent early and often, and to reflect back to them that here is how you've succeeded. Here are some benchmarks that you can see yourself against everybody else. So I think giving them the confidence to know that there's a defined path, because some people don't even know that there's more. And for the formal sector is making sure that they have the confidence to know how to say no to things they don't want, and to have that democracy of inclusion. I can't think of it in any other terms other than that. I hope that makes sense.
Thank you, Viola. So Sheena, in terms of you have worked on different partnerships during COVID, and it has impacted them, both the types of partnerships that you had and the structure of those partnerships. Can you talk a little bit about that in the partnership with schools, the community organizations, others that you've been working with in the past year?
Yeah, schools was one of our main focus areas, because we all know that financial literacy is not in the school systems here in America. I mean, I think there's only 14 states that require some form of financial literacy. So most of us leave school, we can tell you anything about the geometry or, the periodic table, but we can't tell you anything about taxes. And so schools was a very important focus for us. But of course, the issue with the school system came that, of course, for one, they went virtual. And I think another part that was exposed with kids going virtual was the digital divide, or the lack of internet access for everyone. And so school is still a huge focus for us, but it's also in working with those schools for issues that they've seen even outside of, learning money. I don't even have access to the internet in a lot of these places. But schools has been a huge focus for us. One area that has picked up for us has been the community organizations. And so we see a lot more community organizations coming and saying, hey, how do I get organized digital financial education? Whether it is, whether it is more of like a after school type of area, whether it is a community organization within a certain city. So it's been different types of community organizations, but of the areas that we focus on, which does range from employers, schools, different areas, I would say community organizations have definitely picked up of saying, we want really great organized digital financial education opportunities for the people that we work with. So that's been probably the biggest area, but school is still a huge focus for us too.
Great, thank you, Sheena. And I think the school system is a very good place to start also with awareness raising and financial education, etc. So I see both Viola and Eliane, you were nodding. Anything to add to this point, working with schools?
Yeah. For me, it's so the number one thing. I mean, we spoke a lot about financial education, right? And I think as Stash, we did a great job doing that within our app and our website. I think now we're focusing more on an external partnership. I think we already started partnering with some organizations specific to women to start doing some artwork right outside financial literacy, and as well as mentorship program. So I think this is something that we're working on at Stash right now, because I think, again, the education in the community, that's what's to make it. I think I hear the echo. Okay, I think somebody didn't mute that longer. That's fine. I totally agree. I think starting to work outside of our app and our website and going to the community physically and working with organizations and schools. I think that's key future.
Yeah, I just want to quickly say, like, even with school, when I was in college, you know, you still could walk and you could get a credit card on campus. You know, they were set up, and you could sign up for your first credit card, which now I think they make it where you can't do that. That's been outlawed. But that college focus for us is so important, because either one, you're going to have kids who are going to go to either community college, or they're going to skip college, and or they're going to be in college. And especially when we see people who are first or second generation college students, they're going to be more than likely to make the biggest mistakes financially, because no one was there to tell them, hey, don't take out that many student loans, or be prepared for this. And so we try to focus on really that you're getting ready to hit 18, or you're getting ready to hit real life at 22, 23. Then how can we touch you at this point, you know, to get you as much education to hopefully skip as many roadblocks as possible.
Great. So we have 2 more minutes. So I'd like to ask each of you for some very practical advice to participants. What do you have to say in terms of what they can do as at the occasion of International Women's Day, or for the rest of the year, to really advance this agenda? So who'd like to start? Eliane?
Yeah, I think most of the thing for women is women need to have access to tools and resources, right? So I think that, and especially also women in leadership position, when we have decision, when we're in the position where we make decision, we have to sit on the table. How do we make targeted solution and have the women in mind, right? How do we choose our target audience and thinking about, yes, the broad audience, but as well as how can that benefit women? That's number one. And number two is, I think we mentioned that earlier, and like online, it's a beautiful thing. Yes, you do have, I think you mentioned some cyber bullying online when it comes to financial education. And we saw that with the pandemic. There was all kind of stuff online about investing, about take all your money out because you're going to lose some of your money, the stock market is crashing. So really, but on the other side, there are always very powerful resources online for women to educate themselves when it comes to their own finances. And my goal is to have just women take their finance, take the ownership on that. But I think for me, it's education and resources and research online.
Great. Yeah, not to be confused with all the messages online. Sheena.
I'll just actually piggyback off that. I think that both of her points were spot on. One, don't get caught up in the miseducation of what you will see on social media. There are a lot of reliable, reputable sources that you can go to find out good information. And two, we are finding more and more fintechs who are either now having women in leadership roles and or at the same time having services that are specified strictly for women, because we know that historically a lot of those services were not meant directly for women, that it is changing. So pretty much just piggybacking exactly off what she said, I think those are 2 great key points.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think we heard earlier in the introduction that only 7% of fintech leaders are women. So I think that's a great recommendation. Except what was said earlier. Viola?
Yeah, I love the hashtag choose to challenge. And that's, I think, what both of these wonderful women are saying. I think that we've reached a point with all of these International Women's Days that have come and gone, and with the wonderful focus that there's been on women, to encourage them to lean in, encourage them to accept things. But they've also now got to do the next thing, which is even harder and takes more bravery. Learn how to say no. Learn how to challenge. Learn how to say, I'm not convinced, or I don't understand, or I don't know. Or find other people. If you're thinking one way, there's a likelihood that somebody else is either going through the same experiences with their business or in their personal lives. So hashtag choose to challenge is a brilliant rallying call in light of the last 4 years that we've had, in light of the pandemic, in light of not being able to say you don't understand anymore, because there's plenty of information to help you get there so that you can be informed. And if you're going to be financially included, just like Sheena's been saying, and Eliane, you've got to be informed. So therefore, challenge information and challenge yourself on what you can achieve and what you understand and what your goals are.
Great. Thanks for all of these calls to action. All of them very, very good. Eliane, Sheena, and Viola, thank you so much for sharing your experiences today. Myself, I would like to call upon everyone in the audience and all the fintech companies to also adopt and sign on to our women's empowerment principles, as you heard a few times during this conference. I would like to thank also Nasdaq and New York City Fintech Women for amazing partnership to put this program together. And I'd like to hand over to Brad Peterson, who is the Chief Technology and Chief Information Officer at Nasdaq. Over to you. Thank you very much.
Hi, as you just mentioned, I'm Brad Peterson. I run global technology at Nasdaq, and this year I'm joining Ann Dennison as the co-sponsor and executive leader for our Nasdaq, our Women in Nasdaq Employee Network. So today has been an incredible day so far with thought-provoking dialogue and important questions on gender equality. The contributions, I want to thank everyone who participated and have really gone above and beyond shaping the agenda worldwide, and specifically focusing on women who have been impacted, tremendously impacted in our current environment. These persistent efforts are important and also contribute to the significant progress so far. Today's gathering reminded us that there's still a lot to do and ensure that women have equal opportunities at work and in society. So at Nasdaq, we like to take bold moves and have done so throughout our we celebrated our 50th anniversary. And one of the most recent ones is really around reshaping the listing requirements for companies that are Nasdaq listed in terms of board diversity and disclosure. And we see this, and studies also support it, that board diversity contributes significantly to positive company outcomes and performance. So finally, as ally and executive sponsor for the Women in Nasdaq Employee Network, I see this as an important role for me to fulfill, and it involves listening, learning, and growing the Women in Nasdaq network and employee community. So during my career, I've had the opportunity to work with some of the most successful women leaders. At Schwab, I worked for Dawn Lepore, who was CIO and later became CEO of a company. Meg Whitman, who was CEO at eBay, and now Adina Friedman, who leads Nasdaq. And while I was at Schwab over 20 years ago, our executive leadership team had a 50-50 gender split. And it resulted in a very palpable difference in terms of culture, collaboration, and dialogue. So I think it can be done, and it's worth striving for. So on that note, I want to thank you all for your time and presence today. And we look forward to working with you on this journey going forward. Thank you very much.